Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Jacob and Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Robaum, joined as always by my co-host, Jacob Hare. And today we're very lucky to be joined by WIP's Glen Macnow. Glenn, thank you so much for being here.
Sure, guys. My pleasure. Nice to see you.
So let's get right into the interview. For the first part of your career, you were writing for the Inquirer. Why did you decide to switch into radio?
So I actually started out working in newspapers. You're correct, but I worked in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale for about 6 or 7 years. Then I worked in Detroit, and then I came to Philadelphia. I wrote for the Inquirer for 7 years. So we started doing radio part-time when WIP first became a sports station in the late 1980s. And Angelo Cataldi, Al Morgani, Jason Stark, and I hosted a 1 hour a day show. And I loved it. I really loved it. And I also thought that sports radio was going to grow. And I was worried about the future of newspapers. So after a couple of years, Angelo went over there full time, and then Al, Mike Missinelli went over there. And then when they asked me, it seemed like a good opportunity. So I did. And geez, I've been there now 27 years. So it worked out okay.
Yeah, you had a good sense about newspaper back then. So
yeah, it's a shame because that's where I started at, and I loved it. And I love writing for newspapers, but didn't seem to me like they were going to grow, and they certainly have not.
Yeah. So at WIP, you and Ray Dininger have a show called Tell Us Your Story, where you've interviewed guests like Al Michaels, Deuce Staley, Brian Dawkins, and many others. Why and how did you guys start this?
Well, I can tell you exactly the day we started it. It was March 14th of 2020, I think, is the day that sports shut down.
Yeah.
And I mean, you guys remember there was the NBA in the middle of the game just said, we're done. And the next day hockey stopped. And we realized we're a sports talk show and there's no sports. What are we going to do? We can't ask people every day, what's your favorite movie? Although that's a good topic of ours. We got to come up with good sports content when there's no games. Ray and I both come from a writing background, both like doing longer interviews. And we figured we started with our friends. So let's call on our friends and have them tell us the story of their life. So we started with Merrill Reese and Scott Fransky and guys we knew real well. Charlie Manuel came on early, and we realized like this works and people are enjoying it. And when sports started up, we debated, okay, are we done now? Or are we going to just go back to what we're doing? But we enjoy it so much, and we think our listeners do. And it's a rare opportunity on radio to do long form interviews that we've stuck with it, and we're going to do it until we run out of people, which I don't think is going to be soon.
You have any cool upcoming guests?
We have Brian Mitchell. Actually, we're going to talk to Brian Mitchell later this week, which is going to be a lot of fun. Before that, this Friday happens to be Jackie Robinson Day in baseball. It's the day that Jackie Robinson integrated baseball for the first time, and they celebrate it. We can't get Jackie Robinson, but on this weekend we have the gentleman who broke the color line in hockey, the first black player in the NHL. Not a famous player, but he's got a great story. His name is Willie O'Ree, and he's going to be our guest this weekend.
That's awesome. That's pretty cool. So moving on, you've worked in Philly sports media for over 3 decades, and of course it's such a tough place for media. But do you believe it's the hardest place for athletes to play as well?
It's one of the hardest places. I would say Philly, New York, Boston. Although we hate each other as rivals in cities, very similar sports cities, very similar fan bases. Very tough, expect the best, aren't going to let anybody get away with loafing, good, tough sports radio in all 3 towns. So if you're an athlete and you play in one of those cities, it's going to be tough, but it also, when you win, is the most rewarding because we care about that stuff. So those would be the sports cities to me that matter the most.
Yeah,
for sure. And for us as kids now, obviously 2008 when the Phillies won, we were a little young to really remember.
Wow, is that right?
Seeing the Eagles win back in 2018 was really just special, and you really see what it meant to the city, and not just the players and the team, but the fans too.
Well, I'll tell you this. So I have a son who's now 36 years old, which tells you how old I am. But we moved to Phil. He was actually born on the day in 1983 when the Sixers held their championship parade, June 4th, 1983. I guess that makes him 37. Anyway, and we moved to Philly when he was a baby. And he grew up his entire life not seeing a Philadelphia team win because there wasn't a championship here from 1983 to 2008. And he when he was your age and older, he didn't even see one. So I'm glad you got to see the Eagles and enjoy that one.
Yeah, and Earl's
That was pretty special. Yeah, I'm also a big Villanova fan, so to get to see
well, there you go. Okay,
not one but two championships.
Yeah, that counts. That one against North Carolina is one of the great games I've ever seen. So yeah,
and I was lucky to be at that game too. So
were you? Awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you. That was in
2016.
No, I know what year.
Houston.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah, it was pretty cool to be there and experience that.
Yeah, so let's move into
let's get into the current state. Oh, what were you saying?
You got it. You got it.
I would say Jacob, go ahead, but that doesn't really clarify it.
You got it, Earl.
All right. So let's get into the current state of Philadelphia sports. Let's start with the Sixers. Do you think they're true championship contenders, or do you think that they can't really compete with a team like the Nets or the Lakers when it comes down to it?
I definitely think they can compete with the Nets. The Lakers might be a little tough. And I know I'm not the first to say this, and I know this also gets some people upset, but I think so much of it depends on how Ben Simmons does in the playoffs. Ben Simmons can be great in the regular season. He's a great defender. He's a great playmaker. But in the postseason, when it becomes a half-court game, he's going to have to take shots, and he's going to have to make shots. And I think that really cost him in the end last year and the year before. I haven't seen evidence that he has changed. If he does, and he has a great playoffs, this team, you can see your next parade. But if he doesn't, we're back where we were one more time.
What do you think is the cause of his recent struggles? Because lately he's just been straight out awful.
Yeah, I don't know that it's anything more than a cold streak. I don't think there's any big prevailing thing. I think after 5 years, we kind of know what he is, and players get hot and cold. So I just think he's going through a slump.
Mm-hmm. And right now, I know he missed 10 games recently, Joel Embiid, but can you see him winning the MVP award this season?
No, because he missed the 10 games.
Sure.
And that's always going to be a problem with him because he's a big guy who's prone to get hurt. And, if you can get, I know this is a 72-game season, but if you can get in a normal year, 60, 65 games and a full playoffs, that's fine. It may cost him from winning the MVP, but you want him to be there for every playoff game. And if he can do that, and listen, Embiid at his best can carry a team, and that's the best thing they got going.
For sure. And
moving on to some of the other sports in Philly. I know we said we wouldn't talk Flyers, but I got to ask one question. Obviously,
I'll always talk. Listen, I'm a hockey guy, so that's fine.
Not the banner season that everybody was expecting by any means, and certainly the loss to Buffalo yesterday really put down their playoff hopes. And today with the trade deadline, 2 moves really moving Eric Gustafsson to Montreal and Michael Raffl to Washington. Nothing major. Re-signing Scott Laughton, which is probably the biggest move they did today. What do you think about this team moving forward? Obviously, probably not going to be the playoffs, but maybe next season.
And I think this season's kind of a wash. If they make the playoffs, not going to go anywhere this season. In hockey, sometimes you'll see early round upsets or even second round upsets. You'll see a 7 seed and 8 seed win, but those teams usually win because a goalie gets really hot and carries them. And I don't see Hart or Elliott being that guy. So if they make the playoffs, I think they're one and done. I got to tell you, I'm so disappointed by this year because I thought they were going to be good. And I think they started out something like 11-4-3. And, I thought they were going to be right in there. Their problems are huge. And I think everybody shares blame. I think the general manager hasn't done much to help the team since he came in, Fletcher. I really like Alain Vigneault as a coach, but I think that his constant criticism of his players is not helping the team. The goalie went south. The defense is terrible. And we've had a lot of years of Giroux and Voracek at the top of the roster without winning in the playoffs. I think this team, well, I guess we're going to get to the Eagles and them too, but this team, as much as any, is due for a real rebuild. And it's a shame because it looked like they were onto something. But other than Provorov, Hart, Couturier, I guess they signed Lawton today, I don't see anybody that I absolutely need to hold on to for the future.
Yeah.
So
I think
certainly Hart as the goalie of the future.
Well, I hope so. I mean, he did take that huge step back this year, but he's still young, and I think he's really talented, and I absolutely wouldn't give up on him. I mean, he's my goalie next year. Beyond that, I don't know, but he gets one more year to get it right for sure.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think, honestly, the biggest need they need to address is their defense and their top four. I think a guy that they looked at before they really sort of started to fall apart was Matthias Ekholm in Nashville, who maybe
will be I remember that rumor. Yeah.
And I think one of the tough things also is the expansion draft coming up that really caused a lot of teams to decide, you know, let's not trade for this player, let's trade for this player. And obviously the Flyers didn't really have to make those tough decisions now with the team sort of made it for them to decide that they're not really going to be buyers at the deadline. So I think that we'll look to see how they address the defense this summer. I think the forwards will give it another year. Maybe they'll bring someone in, but I think that the defense is probably the biggest issue right now.
The defense was just dreadful this year. And I know everybody says, oh, you know, they lost Niskanen and that was it. But you can't lose one guy and have your entire defense fall apart. We had a lot of faith in those young defensemen that they were all going to be good. And unfortunately, they really haven't developed. And that's a shame.
And I also think they have a lot of hope for Cam York, who's going to hopefully come up next season.
I know, but, you know, again, he was, I think, the 12th pick of the draft, somewhere around there.
14, I think it was.
Okay, 14. Yeah. Until before a guy plays one NHL game.
Yeah.
You know, unless his name is Sidney Crosby, and you know he's that sure bet, I'm not going to bank too much on it.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's move on to the Fighting Phillies. They're off to a hot start right now. Are you buying them as a playoff team with their current roster, or do you believe that Don Bobrovsky needs to make some moves?
I think he will make both. Okay, my answer is yes and yes. I think the Braves are probably the best team in the division, but you don't know how that plays out. Guys can get injured. Guys can have bad years. I think the Phillies are capable of winning about 90 games this year, which could get you into the wild card, could win the division. I still think he's going to have to make moves. I don't like the center field situation at all.
You do.
They were banking on Kingery being there, and he's disappointed. I don't know why, but he hasn't risen up. And I think they're probably going to have to get one more starting pitcher, but that's the kind of thing you can do along the way. So am I buying? Yeah, I'm buying. I think the Phillies are going to have a really good year.
I'm also a little concerned about the bullpen still. I know it's much improved from last season, but I was worried that if one guy goes down, that it's going to be another nightmare for the Phillies. And I mean, Archie Bradley just got hurt, so I think it would be beneficial for us to go out and try to get a reliever because the relievers that Don Bobrovsky brought in have been fantastic so far.
Yeah, particularly Alvarado, who scares me every time he pitches, but he's been very good. Yeah, it's a tough time of the year to make trades because teams will make trades when they decide, okay, we're Flyers at the trade deadline. Okay, we're not going for it. In baseball, it's hard to find a team this early in the year that wants to trade you something. But as time goes on, I think those trades can happen. You're right. I mean, the bullpen is definitely not among the top 10 in baseball, but it looks like it'll be okay. And let's see how this plays out through May and June.
And I think it's interesting how you mentioned the trade deadline with the Phillies, because the past sort of 2 seasons, they sort of were in it and then they sort of fell apart at the end. And you got to think maybe, if they made a more substantial move. I know last year they brought in 2 relievers down the line that really were just terrible. Yeah. And I think maybe if you see this year, if they're even in it more than they've been in the past, that you might look for them to make a bigger move so they can really just stay in it and make the playoffs.
Well, you mentioned Dombrowski, and Dave Dombrowski is not a guy who is like a long-term planner. Dave Dombrowski, you bring in when you think your team has a chance to win. And so if they're close this year, he's going to make moves and he's going to make trades. So that's something. Last year they did fall apart. Last year was weird. I almost don't count last year in baseball. It was a 60-game season and stats were all over the place. The year before that certainly happened, and it could happen again. But I'm optimistic. I need to be optimistic about somebody, so I'll pick the Phillies.
All right, and another nightmare team this season was the Philadelphia Eagles. We saw how it unfolded with Carson and Doug Peterson, and hopefully we can get a bright future with the NFL draft coming up. And if you were the GM and you had to hand the pick in, whose name would be on that card?
Oh my, it's a great question. I think I want here. The good news is, I guess, they have so many needs in so many places that there's almost not a position you can say you don't need to address. All the quarterbacks are going to go early. So that's good for the Eagles because they shouldn't draft a quarterback this year, and it will push more good players down to them. I know a lot of people want to take a wide receiver. Waddle's very popular. I'm fine. You know what? I am fine if they want to take an offensive lineman because the offensive line's getting old. You saw how hurt they were last year, or a cornerback. You want one name? I'll go Patrick Surtain. There's my one name.
And are you happy with the move to trade back from 6 to 12? And
I am. There was one guy I really wanted them to get in the draft, who's Kyle Pitts out of Florida, who I think is going to be a superstar in the league. And so when they initially traded down, I thought, well, that takes away their shot for him. Now, if you believe what you read, he's probably going to go before 6, so they wouldn't have got him in the first place. So my answer is a qualified yes, I'm happy, as long as Kyle Pitts doesn't last to 6 and they missed what would have been a great opportunity. If he's gone and they go to 12 and they get that Miami pick next year, and maybe at the draft next year they parlay all that and do something, I'm okay with that.
Pitts is just a unicorn. I mean, he's a freak of nature.
Yeah.
And today in the modern NFL, his rookie season, he could go for over 1,000 yards.
Definitely he could. I mean, he's going to be – in fantasy football, he's going to be a second-round pick, which the rookie tight ends aren't. And in this draft, he's going to be a top 5 pick. My only fear is that I read the other day that – and again, it's the draft, so you don't believe everything you read. But I read that Jerry Jones is so infatuated with him that he's going to try to trade up to get him. And what I don't want to see is the Eagles have to cover this guy twice a season.
Yeah, certainly not a guy that you look forward to facing on Sunday. But before we let you go, we want to know, we talked about some of the championship memories that we have in Philly. What's your favorite championship memory that you've seen?
Well, I got to cover both parades, the Phillies in 2008 and the Eagles in 2018. I got to be there with a microphone announcing it on the air as it went by and interviewing some of the people who won the championship. So I would say that if I have to pick a moment, the best play I've ever seen in my life is the Philly special. It was the gutsiest, most surprising, right at the end of the first half, brilliant thing I've ever seen. I have it on my cell phone. I probably still watch it once a week, even though everybody's gone. Every single player who was in that play is gone. The coach is gone. That memory will live in my cell phone forever, and that's my favorite movie.
I mean, Nick Foles, ultimate Philadelphia sports GOAT. So that was a great answer. Well, Glenn,
it was a great moment.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on and speaking with us, and we wish you nothing but the best and to stay safe.
Hey, I wish you guys the best. Stay safe, and good luck with your podcast, and good luck moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys.